Hi everyone, this is Richard. This is a video document on learning Dart as your first programming language. I am actually a somewhat beginning programmer myself, and this is a documentation of my experiences. And I hope that if you don't know any programming at all, that this actually may be helpful for you. If you're an advanced programmer though, this is just going to be too basic. But I'm going with the understanding that even though you don't know anything, not even the first thing about programming, that you can at least navigate the computer and install the Dart editor. It's located at dartlang.org, but if you haven't installed it, please do so. But before we begin any further, I want to go through the basics because I think it's really important to understand the basics of programming itself before we jump right into it. So as time goes by and you learn a little bit more, you read a little bit more, you'll be able to understand some of these terms, some of these ideas and concepts themselves. So what is the Dart editor? What is the program we're going to be using? Number one, it's an editor. And what an editor is, it's also an IDE. It's a version of what we call an IDE. Integrated Development Environment. So basically an IDE, or Integrated Development Environment, and an editor, it's basically the same thing. An editor is generally a stripped down version of an IDE. There's no real line in the sand where this number of features makes it by definition IDE, and this fewer features makes it by definition an editor. So just keep that in mind. So it is an editor, but what are these programs themselves? When you think about what is an actual editor, they take for example, an essay of yours, and they look at it and they say, you spelled this wrong, the punctuation here is wrong, this sentence doesn't make any sense, and this whole thing just outright sucks. So they give you some feedback on your work itself. And that's what editors or IDEs actually do. They give you a little bit of help. They point out formatting problems, logical consistencies. Sometimes programs are very hard to organize themselves, and it just helps you out in that way. It also has a couple of other features like debuggers, and this is not just Dart editor, but IDEs, editors in general, but specifically with Dart editor, it has a debugger. Now, what is a bug? A bug is a flaw in the programming. And sometimes if you have a flaw in the program just doesn't work, and you don't always know why. That's where Dart editor comes in. It does have a debugger built in that'll point to, hey, this is not working right in this section. Maybe you want to go fix it. There are other features. I really like the auto-completion. Auto-completion is basically, it's kind of like if you have a smartphone and you're trying to type a few text letters inside of there, and it guesses what words you actually want. That's what auto-completion actually is for the Dart editor, and really like that a lot. We'll go over that in more detail. So Dart editor is an editor. It is a miniature IDE. Secondly, it is a virtual machine. Now, we hear the terms virtual machine, translator, runtime, interpreter. All of these things are relatively synonymous themselves. And basically, when we think about what we're doing here, what we typically write in, what we write in is source code. Sorry, that's just the way I talk, everybody. We write in source code. For us, it's going to be the Dart language. We write in source code and we convert it somehow into a binary or machine language or machine code. All this pretty much synonymous stuff. Which is basically ones and zeros. Why? A transistor has electricity flowing from one side to the next. It either flows or it doesn't. 1 or a 0. So that's all a computer can really talk in, a 1 or a 0. So everything has to be able to be converted into a 1 or a 0. And that's why it's called binary, which means 2, or machine language, 1s or 0s. That's all it does. So you get the source code and you change it into 1s and 0s. How do you do that? Some languages use a compiler. A compiler is just a program that basically converts source code, what we type, goes through the machine, the software, and converts it into 1s and 0s. So if you have a windows.exe file, and you run the file and you install an application, that is a binary itself. So you don't have any source code in there. It's already changed by the compiler into machine language itself. That's kind of like if you had eggs, flour, salt, sugar, you send it into the oven and you pull out a cake. So you cannot actually go back and disassemble it that way. It's a one-way thing, generally speaking. There are other ways to convert that source code to have it read by the computer. The other ways themselves are an interpreter or a virtual machine or VM / translator and translator / interpreter, whatever you want to call it. Then that actually runs on top of the computer. So what we're actually doing is we're sending the source code into this translator or virtual machine that has already been compiled into binary, or at least is running in some semblance of binary on top of the computer itself. So it translates the source code line by line and it runs it on the computer. What Dart actually does is it uses this technique. It's kind of a combination of the two. It's called a JIT, which stands for just-in-time compilation. So basically, it compiles things on the fly, meaning just immediately. So you don't have to compile the whole thing immediately. You just compile it a little bit ahead of time and just as the program is running. So whenever people talk about virtual machine, I generally see it's associated with JIT and virtual machine. I'm not sure if the two are synonymous. I have not found evidence that they are the same thing. Some people call translator, and these are not, again, hard and fast rules. General concept, JIT may be associated more with virtual machine or runtime. I just haven't seen the Dart editor called an interpreter or translator or anything like that. But this is what they're talking about when we're talking about the Dart VM. So just-in-time compilation is just a technique to speed up this part in and of itself. Let me make an example. For example, we have the Bible, okay? And we're going to translate this into English. So you hire somebody, let's just say a monk, and you give him something, I don't know, to donation or something like that. And you have him translate it into binary, okay? I'm sorry, I'm using the monk as an example because, in the Middle Ages, they were the ones who translated the computers. So that's why I'm saying this. So you translate it, into English. I'm getting distracted here. So you have to sit around, wait for him to translate it into English. And once you got it into English, you can read it. It takes a little time, though, right? So what another option actually is you take the Bible, you give it to the monk, and while he's writing it, you're looking over his shoulder as he's translating it, and you're reading the English. So you don't have to wait for him to finish, but he might be slower than you can read. As fast as he is, he's going to be a little bit slower, and so you're going to have to slow down your reading to match his translation itself. What the JIT actually does is you get the Bible. The monk kind of reads it ahead of time and sees what he wants, and he basically speeds it up a little bit and turns it into English. So in other words, he reads the very beginning and says, "In the beginning God created the heavens and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved across the face of the waters." And he reads that and just translates that to, "First God created everything." So he just compacts it down, but it takes a little while for him to read all of it, and then he can optimize, he can make it faster, what he actually read, but he has to have some understanding of this. And that's what Dart does. That's why Dart is supposed to be a fast run language itself, because it uses these techniques just in time in order to speed things up. So it's one of the faster languages, and that's how it was designed and why it was designed to be that way. So this is just the underlying concept of source code. So some languages are source code languages where you have to compile it. You don't have to do any actual compilation with Dart. There are some programs, some languages, computer languages, where you just run on top, and that's closest what we do in Dart. But basically, you put it through the Dart editor or the Dart virtual machine, and it runs from there on. Nice and easy, simple and straightforward to do. Okay, so that's basically the gist of it, of what the Dart editor is. Next, we'll go over a little bit more on the basics of programming itself. Thanks.